Did we do well, my darling girls? Did we really do well? We grew you up to be straight and strong, to do your best to know.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Here we are with some wonderful speakers ready for you. It's our fourth objectinar, and this time we're going to go in some depth into surrogacy. I'm sure you've all read and heard about it before. We're also going to talk a little bit about the government consultation that's recently been held in England with a view to liberalising the law. It's, you know, if you think consultation is a long word, it's much better described actually as a con, because exactly as they did with the Gender Reform Act, they have only consulted the people likely to benefit from the changes in the law, which unfortunately are nearly all men and businesses. And as usual, they only consulted women's groups as an afterthought. We had a very nice meeting with them last week, and they were rather surprised by some of the evidence we put before them. And there were a few open mouths and dropping jaws. So I'd like to thank the Women's Human Rights Commission for letting us use their Zoom. And I'd like to thank the Resistors for lending us wonderful Rebecca, who is in charge of the technology today. If I have difficulties, please be patient, because I'm not very good at technology. It's great to see you all joining. We've got people from Canada, a few people from the UK, someone from Mexico, Stockholm, Sweden, lovely. And well, a very strong contingent from Eastbourne. Oh, Milan, we're doing really, really well. Just to let you know, we are recording the objectinar for YouTube. We've got somebody setting us a YouTube channel. If you want to go on Twitter, then our hashtag is we and then object in capital letters. Please feel free to tweet and talk on Facebook and so on. That would be great. We hope that you will have questions and comments that you'd like to put to our 5 speakers today. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand and then keep your eye, be ready for at the end of the talk for me to bring you in and ask it. Or you can always type questions or comments in the chat and I can pick them up from there. So surrogacy is a very well marketed process. I wouldn't call it a service. Very, very profitable. There's a big dilemma. If you use accurate words about surrogacy, you end up saying things like farming, objectification, exploitation, womb rental, and people switch off. There are strong parallels with prostitution because it uses women's most personal and intimate bodily functions for the profit largely of men. As Kaiser Ekman said, the prostitute says, my body is not myself. And the surrogate says, the child is not mine. All about instrumentalizing women's bodies. And we are humans. We are not objects or instruments or resources. It's about wants, not needs, but it's presented as if every adult has a right to a child, and the rights of the child are rarely, if ever, considered. So for these and many, many other reasons, we object. Just a very important point, the market for surrogacy is being fueled by transgenderism as the drugs given to people who seek to change their bodies affect their fertility, building a market for surrogacy. So, off we go. Our first speaker is speaking from California. We're very grateful to her for getting up and being ready at 6 o'clock in the morning. Quite a commitment. Jennifer Lal is the founder and president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network and the Stop Surrogacy Now campaign. She had a long career in nursing and health management. She's published widely and been heard on the national media in the United States. She's addressed the European Parliament and the United Nations. She's a filmmaker. Her prize-winning Exploitation and Anonymous Father's Day have won prizes. She's also put out Maggie's Story, A Woman's Journey Through Egg Donation, a topic we'll come back to later. And her latest film is #Big Fertility, which was selected for the Silicon Valley International Film Festival. These films, if you're a film fan, are available on Amazon and Vimeo. So Jennifer's going to talk to us for 15 to 20 minutes and kick off the discussion this afternoon. So Jennifer, over to you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Jan. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you all. And good morning to those where it's morning, and good evening or good afternoon. It's nice to see that we have people from literally all around the world. Because as you know, if you follow surrogacy, it is a growing global international exploitative practice on women and children. So I'm gonna I've been asked to speak about the harms, the problems with surrogacy. And I'm going to sort of frame my remarks around 3 harms. One will be in the advertisement and recruitment of women to serve as surrogates. My second point will be on the actual physical health risks. As a pediatric critical care nurse, I'm really interested in the concerns of the health of women being asked to be surrogates, and of course the children that they carry. And then finally, the harm of contracts, the actual legal contracts that women sign when they enter into, most often, a commercial surrogacy. And being in California, I like to say that California is the reproductive tourist capital of the world, where a lot of our fertility agencies advertise by how close they are to Disneyland. So you can actually come to California and go to Disneyland, have a vacation, and rent a baby. So I'm sharing a screen because I understand that in the United Kingdom in particular, there's not a lot of advertisement, and that the whole notion of advertisement doesn't really sit well with the ethos and the sort of the culture in the United Kingdom. But in the United States, there's absolutely no shame in advertising. So here's one agency in California. Look how everybody's happy, a nice pregnant belly, little baby booties, everybody's smiling. Here's one to be amazing. Who doesn't want to be amazing, right? Become a surrogate mother today. This again is a California agency that recruits surrogate mothers as well as women to sell their eggs. Here's another one, satisfaction beyond words. Lifelong relationships, which I will tell you is not always the case. But again, there's just all this notion of helping and creating a family. And of course, there's the monetary benefits. This one advertisement offers $50,000 plus benefits and a $1,000 signing bonus. And if you're a low-income woman, certainly that is an incentive to give the gift of life. So I'm going to unshare that screen right now. Sorry. Thank you. And of course, because of the advertisement, there's never one mention of a harm. There's never one mention of a risk. It's all just puts forward the pro. It's win-win for everybody, make some money, give the gift of life, and everybody's left smiling with this cute little cuddly baby at the end. But as we're learning now, and this is sort of my complaint with a lot of the rhetoric with government officials in particular, they'll say that we need to reform the UK law because our laws haven't kept up with this new way of family formation. We have this new technology, we have new assisted reproduction that helps build families, that help infertile couples, that help same-sex couples. And so we need to amend and update our laws to keep up with this new way of forming families. And I always say, yes, our laws have not kept up. And the reason our laws have not kept up is that we've been doing surrogacy long enough now that we actually have scientific studies in the medical literature that show that surrogate pregnancies are harmful, they're dangerous, they're high risk. And most people just equate a natural, spontaneous conceived pregnancy with a surrogate pregnancy. And in fact, that's not the case. We know that natural, spontaneous pregnancy still carry risk. Women still die in childbirth. Women still lose their children during pregnancy and delivery. So we know that pregnancy inherently has risk. But what we're now seeing in the medical literature, that the surrogate pregnancy, the surrogate mother, is in a high-risk pregnancy category by nature of it being a surrogate pregnancy, even if she's only carrying one baby. A lot of times you'll hear people say, yeah, the high risk is there because she's carrying twins or triplets. So all we have to do is transfer one embryo into the surrogate womb, and that will make sure that she won't have a complicated pregnancy. But that's not true. And we're seeing that in in the medical literature. And for those interested, I'm happy to send the actual studies that I'm going to cite now. But what we're seeing if you compare surrogacy to organ donation, we know that we just can't take a kidney from one person and give it to a person who needs a kidney. We have to make sure that that person's not going to reject that kidney and that they're a good match. So we do a lot of matching with a tissue to make sure that the person receiving the transplant won't reject it. What we're seeing in surrogate pregnancies is when you put a foreign embryo, the surrogate is pregnant not with her own child, but with somebody else's child. Her body immediately rejects it. Her body says, this is foreign. This is not my baby. So in the medical literature, we're seeing a surrogate pregnancy is at higher risk for preeclampsia, which is a life-threatening condition, higher incidence, higher risk of maternal gestational diabetes. And all of this puts the mother and the baby or the babies at risk. So if she's pregnant for one or twins or triplets, you'll see that risk is not only to the woman, but to the baby. And in fact, in the United States, we've had 3 surrogate mothers die. 2 of the deaths recently were in California, and they all were deaths related to pregnancy-related complication. And then if you just double down on the natural risks of pregnancy and you add on these additional risks that we're now seeing that are true in surrogate pregnancies. So here we are, we're advertising all this slick advertisement, which doesn't allude at all to any of these risks or complications. And then we're intentionally paying a woman to put her body at risk. She's being incentivized by this money to take on these risks. And then finally, my third sort of beef, if you will, with surrogacy is the contracts. And I spend a lot of time reading the contracts that the women in the United States and overwhelmingly California, my state, sign. And these contracts are heavy-handed. They unequally distribute the rights to the purchasers. So many of the contracts will have the surrogate mother waives her doctor-patient confidentiality so that the intended parents and the doctors can kind of talk about the health of the surrogate mother, her past health, her current health. So there's no sense of confidentiality. There's no sense that the physician is protecting her and and caring for her, because the physician sees the purchasers as his client, as his patient, as his customer. Surrogate pregnancy contracts overwhelmingly will include what we call either fetal reduction clauses or termination clauses. And almost all of the contracts I read say that the intended parents have to give absolutely no reason whatsoever that they want either the pregnancy terminated or the pregnancy reduced down. We had 2 surrogate mothers in California who got pregnant with triplets. The intended parents decided they didn't want triplets. So in one case, they wanted the pregnancy reduced down to a singleton. And then the other case, the intended parents wanted it reduced down to twins. The surrogates had signed these contracts where they had agreed to reduce or terminate the pregnancy. But when faced with having to do that, they weren't able to, because there was no reason that the children should be terminated or the embryos should be reduced down because there was nothing wrong with the children. So these 2 surrogate mothers were torn because they just didn't want to reduce the pregnancy for convenience sake. So we had to scramble to get them legal representation. So you'll see that in the contracts, it says, if you do not obey, if you are in breach of your contract, you must give back all of your money. You must keep the child if the child is born with any kind of defect, because we didn't want the child. We asked you to terminate or reduce. You need to perhaps care for the child until they're of legal age, 18 in the United States. So there's all this heavy-handed breach of contract that we will sue you. We will come after you and sue you. So those are sort of the 3 points, the way that women are recruited with absolutely no sense of the risk, the actual known risks that we have now. So our laws need to keep up with knowing that we now know these are high-risk pregnancies and that these contracts are basically an enslavement. A woman is enslaved for 9 months where she's told everything she can and cannot do, and if she does not comply, she will be in breach. And then I will just kind of close with, because Jan asked me just to say a little bit about surrogacy during COVID and the pandemic. And if you followed what's happening in like Ukraine and all these babies that have been born that intended parents can't come and pick them up and they're all stranded. You know, we've had that in the United States too. It's not heavily being reported, but I've spoken to several surrogates who are pregnant right now during the pandemic or have given birth to couples. You know, one surrogate in particular has just gave birth to a baby for a person in the United Kingdom. So, you know, that's working in all countries around the world where surrogacy and the travel ban. And as a pediatric nurse, I can just tell you that these children who are being, really like in the case of Ukraine, they're being cared for in an institutional setting. You know, that there will be a lot of developmental issues that these children will have, you know, down the road because they've been cared for in such an institutional, non-maternal child way. So I'm going to stop there, and if there's any questions now, or Jan can introduce the next speaker.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Haven't got any questions in the Q&A. There's a few comments in the chat, people pointing out that multiple pregnancies are, you know, carry their own risks. And we've got a lady who lost a child. She hasn't said it was through surrogacy, but obviously we'd all be very sympathetic at anyone that's been through such a horrendous process as that. A few people are asking about our YouTube channel. Unfortunately, we're waiting on a volunteer for that, and she was busy, and she's promised she will get on with it, and it should all be up there very soon. So if there's no questions for Jennifer, thank you very much, Jennifer, much appreciated. I'd like to move on now to Gary. Gary Powell is a long-time LGBT activist and campaigner. He's a gay man. He's also a counsellor in Hertfordshire, in England, in Aylesbury. And Gary's going to talk to us about why we shouldn't view surrogacy as representing progress in LGBT equality or human rights. Adoption should be available to all people who are appropriate parents, but surrogacy is problematic and it's putting profit before ethics. It should never happen, particularly in people as vulnerable as children. So Gary, go ahead, please. Oh, could you unmute yourself?
Thank you.
Please,
I've just unmuted. Thank you very much for the introduction, Jan. Much appreciated. It's great to be here, and thank you everybody for taking an interest in this important topic and for joining us today. Before I start, I just wanted to make a minor correction, a couple of minor corrections to the introduction. One is I'm a counsellor in Buckinghamshire, but it's a very minor correction.
Oh, sorry.
That's no problem.
Terrible, yeah.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right. The other correction is that I don't call myself an LGBT activist anymore.
Okay.
I call myself a gay activist because I don't campaign on gender identity. As far as I'm concerned, it has nothing to do with the gay rights, gay and lesbian, bisexual rights movement. Gender identity has nothing to do with sexual orientation. So I call myself a gay activist. I did comply for a while, called myself LGBT, but because of the problems we're getting with gender identity campaigners, I've disassociated myself from that. So
Fair.
just
I didn't get a chance to check with you. That's fine.
That's all right. That's no problem. But if yes, if I can, I'm Gary Powell. I've been a gay rights activist the past 40 years or so, and I don't buy into the credo of the appalling homophobic, misogynistic LGBTQIA+ movement, the absurd Alphabet Alliance. There's a lot that I don't like about the culture and aims of the Alphabet Alliance, but two things I particularly dislike are its championing of surrogacy and of extreme gender ideology. The moves to liberalise surrogacy arrangements seem to be significantly driven by the concept of fertility equality for gay men, and this is a serious mistake. I strongly support gay parenting via adoption or permanent care arrangements of the kind that exist in some Australian states, or via fostering. but I oppose all forms of surrogacy for all people because of the harm it causes to women and children. I also regard it as particularly damaging to the struggle for gay rights in oppressive, homophobic countries abroad, of which there are so many, for surrogacy to be promoted in the UK, in the West, under a gay rights banner, as it increasingly is today by the LGBT lobby. In addition, in a political age that's particularly unstable and volatile, I fear a future backlash against the UK Western gay community as a result of surrogacy and other harmful measures being promoted under a gay rights banner, a backlash that could spread across the West and across the globe. We saw from the text of Lady Hale's Supreme Court judgment on the 1st of April that the sense of gay men having a right to fertility equality is becoming a driving force in the justification of surrogacy and the reform of surrogacy law. The Supreme Court judgment was extraordinary in that it upholds a claim of over £500,000 against the NHS to finance 4 commercial surrogacies in California, in addition to the presumably uncontroversial award of over £500,000 for clinical negligence. Particularly extraordinary is the fact that this award, to be paid for by the UK taxpayer, was made to the claimant to pursue something abroad that is illegal in the UK for the very reason that our lawmakers deemed commercial surrogacy to be unethical. Yet Lady Hale's judgment has largely flown under the radar in the coronavirus crisis. The award made by the Supreme Court was contrary to public policy in the view of the 2 dissenting judges. Reference was made in the judgment as justification for surrogacy being a route for gay men to have children. The activists who claim to speak for the LGBT community have views divorced from very many mainstream lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. There is significant opposition to surrogacy among many gay and lesbian people. The pretended rights of wealthy gay men cannot justifiably be used as a reason to liberalise surrogacy law in the UK at the expense of women and children. Almost all my own gay male friends oppose surrogacy, but in many cases where gay men and surrogacy are concerned, there's a staggering degree of indifference towards the dangers posed to women and children caused by surrogacy. People who oppose surrogacy are misrepresented in the LGBT media as simply trying to stop gay men having children. With our rationale and evidence hardly ever presented, we are portrayed as having some kind of homophobic agenda. I've been around long enough to witness what the gay commercial scene does to young gay men. I'm not talking about gay social networking groups or gay political groups. It's the gay commercial sex meet scene. It's hardly surprising that so many gay men who have had too much interaction with that commercial gay male sex meet scene, so many gay men develop a profound narcissistic streak and become hardened towards the needs of others. There is a level of brutality and objectification, instrumentalization of others in the sex meet scene that is actually the last thing a young gay man needs when he's trying to come to terms with being gay and seeking to build a supportive community. The gay men who largely give the commercial gay sex meet scene a wide berth tend to turn out very differently from many of those whose gay identities and personalities are forged on that scene. It is a meat market with a hierarchy based on looks, youth, and money. It is profoundly damaging to the psyche and to people's sense of self-esteem, as well as to their sense of moral responsibility to others. Unfortunately, we see too much of this hardness towards the needs of others, this narcissism, in the attitude of many gay men towards the exploitation of women and children by the surrogacy industry. I stress, however, that many gay men, once they start to find out about the harm surrogacy causes, have very serious reservations about it. There's an assumption that there's some kind of absolute right to be a parent. That right does not exist, and the assertion of that demand as a right cannot come at the expense of other people's and other groups' rights. The facilitation by Lady Hale and the Supreme Court of commercial surrogacy abroad for UK citizens when commercial surrogacy is illegal in the UK is a very spurious putative gay right, and closer scrutiny is needed to identify who it is in the gay community who will benefit. Commercial surrogacy is the only pretended gay right that can benefit only the wealthy members of the gay community. Commercial surrogacy in the USA often involves six-figure sums. Even so-called altruistic surrogacy in the UK can involve almost £40,000 in costs. Only a wealthy gay male elite can benefit from the liberalisation and facilitation of commercial surrogacy within the LGBT community, so-called community. There is no other pretended gay right that falls into such a category. It is the LGBT plus movement that has been clamouring for surrogacy rights, and Lady Hale's judgment referred to the aspirations of gay men to have children via surrogacy. Big Fertility, a multi-billion-dollar global industry, is happy to ride on the coattails of the LGBT movement in order to achieve its financial aims. How has the brave, historical, political LGBT movement morphed into the intolerant, dogmatic, bullying, narcissistic LGBTQIA+ movement that we see today? The movement that is championing surrogacy and gender extremism, among other damaging enterprises. The political LGBT movement had always, until recently, had a culture characterized by solidarity, compassion, and open debate. So that's the political LGBT movement. Very different from the commercial gay sex meet scene. But the modern LGBTQIA+ movement is something very different from what we were used to in gay politics. It is as though the narcissistic, callous values of the commercial gay male sex meet scene have colonized the political movement as well. Today's political platform of the LGBT movement has been determined by powerful gay rights charities looking for new causes to campaign for since legal equality for LGBT people in the West was achieved. Stonewall, the UK supposed gay rights, LGBT rights campaigning organisation, it's actually a gender identity campaigning organisation now. Stonewall has a turnover of over £8 million. Its CEO earns a six-figure sum. Without new victimhood issues to campaign for at home, the funding of gay rights charities would have risked drying up. But there are continents still full of homophobia out there, and the gay rights charities could have turned their focus to helping LGBT people abroad in repressive states. But that presumably isn't what generates turnover, and isn't what inspires people to part with money, who are so preoccupied with their own personal interests and their own egos. So we are presented instead with the causes of extreme gender ideology and surrogacy, as well as other highly questionable campaigns. Gender ideology has nothing to do with sexual orientation, yet the Western gay rights charities adopted gender ideology as a cause about 5 years ago, after taking not the slightest bit of interest in that issue until around 2015. Stonewall is now primarily a gender identity campaigning organisation. Another issue that's being adopted as a central campaigning prong is surrogacy, with the claim that it's a gay rights issue. The media takes very little interest in the plight of women who have had terrible experiences as a result of offering surrogacy services or egg donation services, which is egg sale services. Especially in the cancel culture that's established itself in the media, there's a reluctance to criticise surrogacy or to expose facts that would imply criticism, as they could lead to accusations of homophobia. The logic is that if surrogacy is a legitimate gay right, then opposing surrogacy is automatically homophobic. However, as surrogacy burgeons, it will eventually become impossible to suppress the countless stories of harm and abuse that the practice is causing worldwide. The recent case of the dozens of stranded babies in Ukraine because of the COVID lockdown is an example of this. Gay and lesbian activists are working hard in highly repressive homophobic countries such as Russia, most Middle Eastern states, and most African states. They are already experiencing the backlash that is resulting from the overreach of the Western LGBT campaigns. Decisions are being made in Western countries that indicate no interest at all in how they're likely to impact on courageous, struggling, and endangered gay and lesbian activists in repressive homophobic states abroad. So long as Western LGBT activists get what they want, they don't seem to care much what happens to LGBT people abroad. The governments of repressive homophobic states are using the excesses of the LGBT campaigns in the West, including the demands of surrogacy and gender extremism, as an excuse for opposing even moderate demands from gay and lesbian people in their countries for civil liberties, such as the decriminalization of homosexuality. It's an appalling burden on gay and lesbian people, both here and abroad, to have our reputation and the reputation of our political cause associated with a harmful and exploitative movement such as the surrogacy liberalization movement. In my opinion, the law should be amended to prevent the colonialism of allowing foreign women to suffer the harm and exploitation from British surrogacy tourism, from which the law protects British women at home. By facilitating and sanctioning commercial surrogacy abroad, the UK is cushioned from the effects of wealthy British citizens, gay or straight, pursuing commercial surrogacy overseas. All the problems relating to the fallout and the harm are conveniently exported abroad via commercial surrogacy tourism. It seems to me to be an indication of the extent and depth of institutionalized sexism and misogyny that the suffering of women at the hands of the surrogacy industry is treated as though it was so peripheral. We even find self-described feminists, such as Lady Hale, treating surrogacy as though it can be properly regulated. It can't, and as though it is justified in order to provide gay men with babies. It isn't. Let's remind ourselves that the sale of human organs is forbidden. The sale of human organs is forbidden worldwide, with the exception of in Iran. People die as a result of not being able to buy a kidney from a poor person who would sell one. No one dies as a result of not being able to buy a gestated baby from a poor woman. Yet imagine the outrage if Lady Hale had upheld a claim for a poor person for somebody to go abroad and buy a kidney from a poor person that would save their life. Buying kidneys is illegal in the UK because of the obvious risk of exploiting the desperate poor that it involves and encourages. I'm sure the public would be outraged at someone getting taxpayer money to carry out the exploitation of kidney purchases abroad instead. However, when it comes to commercial surrogacy, it doesn't seem to have the same effect when the person being exploited abroad is instead potentially an economically desperate woman. When taxpayer money is awarded by the courts to carry out exploitation abroad that is illegal in the UK. Some wealthy gay men, together with the multi-billion-dollar big fertility industry that wants their money, don't like to hear the word no. It is time to say no to them and to all people who think they have a right and entitlement to instrumentalize and exploit financially vulnerable women. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gary. It was wonderful to hear a very common sense and obvious view that so many people don't get. You've got a lot of support in the chat, as I'm sure you can see. So many thanks for that. We've got a few questions in the Q&A. I'd like to bring in Anna Cleves, Ellie Hart and Joan Grant. So please be ready for Rebecca to bring you in, and you'll need to unmute yourselves when we do. Thank you very much to those who provided links to information in the chat. Somebody was asking, is there anything we can do? We are going to ask you at the end of this webinar to do one piece of activism if you live in England. We've drafted a letter to MPs giving the top 10 reasons to vote against the proposals that the Law Commission is putting forward for the liberalisation of surrogacy in the UK. Well, it turned into be 11 because we couldn't get it down to 10. Please download the letter. There's a link to help you find and contact your MP directly, and please send it off. And if you have got any more energy, please seek a meeting with your MP and send them a copy of Lauren's essay, introduce them to Stop Surrogacy Now and so on, and give them some information. MPs need information. to persuade their colleagues on these issues, and the more succinctly and accurately we can present that information, the better. So thank you very much for all those contributions. Rebecca, could we now bring in the questioners? We've got Ellie Hart, who was the first, then Anna Cleves, and then Joan Grant. Hope those people are ready.
I just wanted to ask, in America, which international law do they depend on to be able to be so flagrant about surrogacy? This is for Jennifer.
Jennifer, please unmute.
Yep. If I'm understanding, you're asking what international law does the U.S.
Yes.
We just work in concert with the various country laws. So when Gary and I spoke last week, for example, to your UK Law Commission, you know, my appeal to them was not only to make sure that surrogacy is stopped in the United Kingdom, but that English, you know, citizens can't come to the United States. So I saw somebody, I think it was Marie Joseph, commented in the chat box about, you know, Italy is trying to pass a law that would ban the travel abroad. So it really, you know, in one of the ads I showed, the very last ad I showed actually had a little disclaimer like, help us, we'll help you navigate the visa and the immigration issues. So we work very well with, for example, the Spanish countries and the United Kingdom, because there's no problem with people from Spain or the United Kingdom coming to the US. Now there's a problem with people coming from France, for example, for surrogacy, because there are immigration issues there. But my larger concern, though, is that the United Kingdom is allowing people to come here. You have the Druitt Barlows, a very famous couple in the United Kingdom that's come to hire surrogates here. Yeah, Elton John and David Furnish, you know, came twice to buy eggs and red wombs. So,
thank you.
Question in the chat, and I'll ask it for you. Joan, could you please come in with your question?
Okay, so my question is sort of related. I suppose it's about fertility in the broader sense, and it's about whether we should also have thoughts about IVF for lesbian couples, transgender couples. It's not clearly not the same as surrogacy, but it seems to me it's kind of related. It's the same sort of instrumentalization, and I just wonder whether people have views.
Who would you like to answer that question?
Maybe Jennifer, possibly.
Yeah, would you mind, Jennifer?
So I guess in my mind, lesbian couples don't need IVF. IVF is where the eggs and the embryos are in the petri dish. I mean, lesbians need sperm, so that's low tech.
Yeah, so it's still donated. So I mean, I know it's not quite the same, but it's still donated. It's still, transgender people can still get IVF on the NHS if they, you know, for whatever reason. I mean, it's not identical, and I realise it's a slight off-field thing, but it seems to me it's all about, if you change your body, there's going to be consequences, and it's that's the sort of angle I'm coming from.
Yeah. I mean, I would commend you to watch one of my films, Anonymous Father's Day, which is the whole movement of the donor-conceived people that are now coming of age. That you know, so it just raises, I think, more issues than we want to talk about on surrogacy. Yes. You know, the issues of the rights of the child, known donation versus anonymous donation. The commerce, is this donation or is it egg selling, sperm selling? So I think, you know, that takes us a little bit further down the path than we want to go on surrogacy.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Right, Ellie's put her question in the chat. She's saying, and I think I partly answered your question by what I said earlier about please write to your MP. Ellie's wondering what we can do to try and stop the commercial surrogacy becoming available in the UK following the Law Commission consultation. So would either of you like to address that one? Gary, as a UK person, is that one best sent your way?
I don't mind unless another colleague would like to answer. I was just yes.
We could leave it till the end when we've heard everybody.
Should we do that?
Yeah, should we do that? Is that okay, Ellie?
Yes, if Ellie's happy with that.
Because then we'll have heard everybody, and hopefully it'll be partly answered as we go through. So that's great. just like to comment on your very apposite comments about narcissism. I do think we, as such a media and image-based culture, we are sort of inculcating narcissism across the population, and I think there's a lot of that underlying the push for transgenderism to be you know, shoved at children at the slightest excuse, and doesn't make people very happy usually being narcissistic. They've often got a frail little person inside that makes them very, very unhappy. So we're going to move on. I think that, hang on, there's a very good suggestion here. Obviously we've written our letter to MPs, but somebody, Liz Poole, has suggested, could Gary condense his speech into a template letters to send to our MPs too? I think that's another very good idea. So thank you for that, Liz Poole. I'm going to move on now to Layla Namdar Khan, who is a board member of Object and plays a key role in our surrogacy team. Layla co-wrote with Dr. Anna Cleeves our response to the UK government's consultation. Layla had a long career working with vulnerable women in secure hospitals, most of whom had been sexually exploited, and that lay behind a lot of their difficulties. But of course, they were never believed at the time. So Layla's going to talk to us about some of the things she found out when she was researching to respond to the consultation. If you could unmute yourself, please, Layla, that would be great.
I think we might have lost Layla's connection.
Oh yeah, I can't see Layla. Okay, well, maybe we'll move on then and come back to Layla when she reappears. She probably clicked the wrong thing. In that case, we'll move on to Lauren for now, if that's okay, because I know Lauren's got lots to say to us. Lauren, we've only just met Lauren. Very good to meet her. Lauren studied women's reproductive biology as part of her degree. She's a member of Object's surrogacy team, and congratulations again, Lauren. She is the winner of the Object Essay Prize 2020 with a stunning piece of work on the problems with altruistic and commercial surrogacy. She joined us at the Law Commission last week, and the professors were hanging open mouthed at some of the points that she made. So Lauren's going to talk to us. Over to you, Lauren, if you could like to unmute yourself.
Yes, I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Right, so I've got 10 minutes to go through what's wrong with the Law Commission consultation, which is a slightly tall order because there's plenty wrong. So what I've decided to do is stick to very broad points, but if anyone wants to discuss the details, I'm sure we can discuss that afterwards. So in the UK, the law on surrogacy at the moment is essentially the Surrogacy Arrangements Act of 1985, which was then modified slightly by the Human Fertilisation Embryology Act. But the basic system is one where only so-called altruistic surrogacy is allowed, and the baby buyers must seek a parental order through the courts in order to be recognised as the child's parents. So the current development that we're seeing in the law started really in 2017, where the all-party political group on surrogacy was set up. And their aim is, quote, to fully review our surrogacy laws, encourage and promote debate on the issues, facilitate further research into how surrogacy is conducted, and bring the law into line with modern social realities, and encourage domestic surrogacy in the first instance, unquote. So the Law Commission, which is funded by but is completely independent from the government, started to consult on surrogacy law in 2018. The terms of reference of their project don't include banning surrogacy. The justification that they give for this is that it would be, quote, unachievable and untenable, unquote, despite the fact that there is prohibition in place in many countries around the world. Their other reason was that it is against the stated wish of the government. The leader of the Law Commission project is Nicholas Hopkins, who was at great pains to stress on Wednesday that within the terms of reference, the project aims were to reform surrogacy law, not to liberalise it. However, the consultation report is 500 pages long, and all of its proposals involve liberalising surrogacy law, which might lead a person to believe that in this instance, the Law Commission is working totally independently to give the government what it's already said it wants. The single biggest flaw in the consultation report is that it totally ignores the rights of women and children. It should be fairly difficult to imagine how you might enter into a project to regulate pregnancy and motherhood without considering the rights of mothers and children. So I think that's a really good place to start looking at the process. In producing the report, the Law Commission held meetings with individuals and groups, and these included surrogacy organisations, legal bodies, and of course Stonewall, representing LGBT+ rights. No organisations primarily concerned with women or children's rights were included at that very early stage of the project. When asked repeatedly in a meeting last Wednesday about their process to ensure that all stakeholders were consulted, the leader of the project explained that there wasn't a process, essentially. So the Commission failed to identify women as a key stakeholder group or to consider the broader implications for society of their proposals. So having proposed the liberalisation of the law in line with the government's aims, the fact that this necessarily will require recruitment of more women to act as gestational mothers is ignored. There's no recognition that surrogacy inherently instrumentalises women's bodies or that it normalises the use of women's bodies for the benefit or profit of others. The effect of surrogacy on the legal status of motherhood isn't considered, and nor is the use of the pervasive stereotype of women's altruism. This would be one hell of an oversight, if that's what it was. But 4 organisations did object to the proposals during the drafting of the report. Now, 3 were Christian organisations and 1 was a bioethics group, but all of them objected on the grounds of exploitation of women. This didn't prompt any engagement with the women's sector, who would be the obvious choice if you were seeking expertise on the exploitation of women. The report does very briefly cover concerns around the exploitation, commodification of women and lack of or defective consent. We got 5 pages out of 500. And it does reference Andrea Dworkin's arguments about the similarities between prostitution and surrogacy. It then sidesteps all of that with a liberal feminist choice argument and decides instead to set up a false dichotomy between respecting women's autonomy and engaging in paternalism. And that is apparently all the consideration that women are entitled to. There is no suggestion anywhere in the report that there need to be any regulations to protect women. And so in the public consultation, almost no opinion was sought on this. Egg donors were ignored entirely. The suggested minimum age of 18 for a woman to become a surrogate, and there's no requirement for her to have previously had children, is justified on the basis of equality with the minimum age for buyers to commission a surrogacy. Apparently, any potential coercion of very young, vulnerable women into surrogacy is less of a concern than the symmetry of the law. If these proposals go ahead, then in the UK, the Kennel Club will have stricter regulations on the age, health, number of litters and number of caesareans of bitches for which it will register puppies than will be in place to protect women in surrogacy. As for children's rights, issues around legal parentage, birth registration and the child's ability to discover their origins are discussed. One of the main planks of the Law Commission's proposed new pathway is that surrogacy commissioners will become the child's legal parents at birth. The elephant in the room here is that this is directly contrary to the recommendations of the UN Special Rapporteur on the Sale and Sexual Exploitation of Children's report of January 2018, which states that failure to recognise the mother as the child's legal parent at birth violates the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which the UK has ratified and is bound by. The Law Commission believed that, quote, in the context of an arrangement from which the surrogate is not profiting, there may be scope to query the rapporteur's view that not recognising the surrogate as a legal parent at birth means there is a breach of the optional protocol, unquote. Essentially, they seem to believe that if a surrogate does not profit and can object to the buyers becoming legal parents within the first week, then the recommendations have been satisfied. The issue of payment is also covered by the Commission, but they don't make any recommendation here, instead recognising it's a controversial issue and seeking public opinion. The report tacitly acknowledges that mothers acting for profit violates the Convention of the Rights of the Child and CEDAW, but it doesn't take it off the table. On the issue of intermediaries, the Commission feel that those who currently do profit, i.e. fertility clinics, lawyers, cannot be asked not to do so, but they suggest that agencies should remain non-profit and become responsible for regulating surrogacy agreements within their new pathway. They don't seem to regulate that not-for-profit doesn't mean has no financial interest in. And so whether or not agencies that derive income from matching mothers and surrogacy commissioners might have a vested interest here isn't discussed. Nor seemingly is the fact that current not-for-profit activities of surrogacy groups extend to lobbying for law reform and any effect that that might have had on their own consultation. The report does recognise that a key issue with the current system is that the court's hands are often tied because it's presented with a fait accompli. From a child welfare perspective, the Commission proposes preconception checks, which might have been welcome, except for their concern that these checks not be too onerous, so they would be administrative and include a criminal record check. Under their proposals, these checks will replace the current post-birth check entirely, so there will be no requirement for social workers to actually observe the child with its commissioners. Payment is another area of uncertainty under the current law. While statute prohibits mothers from profiting, in practice the courts are waving through expenses with no itemisation, which are broadly perceived to be well beyond out-of-pocket expenses. The Commission does not believe that penalties for breaking the rules on payment should be enforced. So on one of the central issues that they've identified as needing reform, they intend to make no substantial change. This is because punishment of baby buyers, whether that be financial or failing to recognise parentage, will also affect the child. This is a key reason why regulated surrogacy will never be enforceable. All of this led to a public consultation on the details of the proposed pathway rather than the broader ethics at play. As anyone who responded will know, it was far from accessible, focusing on the fine detail of the proposals, which made it very difficult to make a coherent objection on the grounds of women and children's rights. The public consultation ended last October, and the Commission is currently analysing responses and moving into producing an internal report next year. A draft bill is expected to be proposed in 2022. Whilst we clearly disagree with the proposals the Law Commission has suggested, the bigger issue here is the process which produced such a myopic report. It fundamentally failed to identify that women and children are key stakeholders. It allowed itself to be lobbied by one side of a debate without seeking a balanced opinion. It misrepresented feminist opposition to surrogacy as paternalistic and proceeded to strawman its justification. It retrofitted its process and its justifications to meet the government's prior stated aim, and fundamentally it wasn't independent. And I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Fantastic. There's so many problems. You could write a whole book about it, how not to do a consultation. How can you do a consultation on surrogacy and not anywhere even mention the rights of the child? It's appalling. Now, have we got any questions in the Q&A for Lauren? Yeah, well, comment, yeah, Lena says, oh my God, that kennel club analogy is chilling. And yeah, Ellie's put another question up. She says, in your experience, it's quite a big question this, in your experience, what is the best way to discuss this issue with people who are generally okay with surrogacy or haven't thought about it much but support it under the banner of LGBT rights? She says, I imagine it's pointless trying to convince people who are die-hard surrogacy advocates, but most of my friends are lib thems who have soft support for surrogacy for reasons like LGBT rights, women's bodily autonomy, etc., or simply haven't thought too much about it, and I want to try and get through to them. So yeah, that's a great question. We've all got those friends, and even in schools, a lot of young kids in school are getting a very biased view of surrogacy, no awareness of the disadvantages, and very much, oh yes, you know, let's have choice, it'll be fine. So Lauren, would you like to address that one? If so, could you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, I can try. I think a lot of the problem is that because, particularly if you look at the media and things like that, the kind of story of a surrogacy is always told from the point of view of the people who are buying the baby. And I think for a lot of people, it's just that they haven't thought that in the middle of that arrangement is a woman who's going to become pregnant, carry a child, give birth to it, and then relinquish it. And I think the thing to do is to try to get people to think about it solely from the mother's point of view. When I wrote my essay, I only thought, you know, from a women's rights point of view and a children's rights point of view. And there's plenty to go at when you do that. There's the medical risks that Jennifer talked about. You know, there's loads of things. So I think but the biggest thing to try to do is to shift people's perspective over, because I think everybody thinks about it from the point of view of, oh, you know, really cute baby, really nice family. And I think you've got to get them to look at the other side of it.
Thank you. If I could just add to that, I think looking at the puppies is probably a good analogy. You know, everyone wants a cute little puppy for their children or for their family, but look at the regulations they've had to introduce and all the puppy farming scandals that have been across the country, and how people are urged now to really, really check out the person from whom they acquire a dog. Because, you know, obviously there's some very, very unpleasant things are going on. So I think that's quite a good way, and everybody knows what it's like to want a nice fluffy little puppy.
And would I be able to add something as well?
Gary,
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is a very important question. When people see surrogacy as an LGBT right, as a way of providing gay men with children, the focus is away from the victims. A lot of people have absolutely no idea of the suffering that's caused to other individuals as a result of surrogacy, and the unscrupulous agencies that are operating in places like California, where Jennifer lives, and the exploitation of women trying to get paid for their services and being left with big medical bills. But I think one of the best things that can be done in trying to persuade other people to think again about surrogacy is to direct them towards Jennifer's excellent documentaries, which are all available on Amazon. If you have Amazon Prime, you can watch them for nothing. Big Fertility is one of them, and I'd certainly direct people to that one first. But there's a number. And just pointing out that, you know, women have serious health problems. Women actually die in the process of surrogacy. And there was a recent death in California that women have to sign away their reproductive rights in the contracts. So they get told by the purchasing parents whether or not they should have an abortion, for instance. There's coercion involved. Women grieve, very often grieve for years. And Jennifer and I have met surrogate mothers, birth mothers, who are still grieving years after giving birth to the baby who was taken away. Often during the process, the birth mother realizes that the people she's carrying a baby for are actually not very nice people. And then, of course, when the baby is born, she doesn't want to hand that child over, because she can well imagine what kind of life that child will have with the people. So massive moral issues to consider. The issue of the children as well, children's rights. How would a baby feel to be taken away from its birth mother immediately after it's born? We don't even do that to dogs. And the issue of genealogical bewilderment, and children later on realizing how they've come into the world, asking themselves questions about their birth mother, whether their birth mother's okay, what it feels like to be somebody in the world because you've been purchased, you've been paid for. That can have a very bad psychological effect. So all of this is covered in Jennifer's documentaries. Thank you.
More questions here. We've asked that one. Somebody in the chat says the organ donation is a very good one. I think also the adoption thing, you know, the amount of checks that there are before people can adopt. We should have at least equal attention paid to having a baby handed over to you. And there's absolutely no attention paid to there's a UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which I believe says that children should, where at all possible, know as much as they can about their parentage and heritage. And it's one thing where, if say a parent is dead, to say, okay, we're going to try and deal with this situation by adoption and try and provide a substitute family. But to actually deliberately go via surrogacy and create that situation with a child that could never have been consulted. It seems to me absolutely incredible. We've got Layla back with us now, so keep the questions coming if you've got them. I'll reintroduce Layla and hopefully she'll be able, oh, where's she gone? Hang on a minute. Yes, there she is, Layla. So as I said before, Layla, board member of Object, plays a key role in our surrogacy team, co-wrote our response to the government's consultation, and had a long career working with vulnerable women in secure hospitals. So Layla, over to you, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Sometimes
Yes.
I'm told I can't be heard. Before I move on to my little slot, I very quickly want you to draw your attention to the fact that the push for surrogacy is not just coming from the groups that we've heard about today, but I would also draw your attention to organisations or universities like University College London and University College Hospital that does enormous amount of search in fertility and reproductive rights. I attended a 6-week course on this not long ago with FutureLearn online, and that course is under Politics and Society, and the course is entitled Making Babies in the 21st Century. It's a 6-week course, and it runs from regulations and donor gametes all the way through fertility preservation, ovum freezing, donor anonymity and parental disclosure, international surrogacy agreements, and surrogacy. So they're very well embedded. The academic side of all of this in UK is very well embedded. In fact, I think the cause, one of the corners of bringing the consultation into fruition was research that's been done in various universities like Exeter that is demanding changes to the surrogacy law. And also you have cyber feminism, where we are demanding surrogacy now, where we want to abolish the family as we understand it. And maybe as radical feminists, we might be able to have sympathy with that. But the notion that we're going to house women and have babies for everyone is a bit more of a stretch too far. So I would say that their attitude towards surrogacy is glowing. They vicariously ask us to go and look for surrogate sites that are agents for surrogates, and Pride Angels is one of their favorite ones to tell us about. And then we have only their concerns about international surrogacy, which of course the consultation, as you might have had already, is trying to address as well, because they would rather keep all surrogacy business in the UK rather than people hopping about the world as various countries ban surrogacy, making surrogacy more difficult. So they also go towards other interferences like PGD, which is pre-implanted genetic diagnosis. So any eggs that are planted into the surrogate could be subject to PGD, so that the child that they're going to produce is a perfect child, because anything that is unwanted can be eliminated. So I just thought I'd bring that to your attention. The other one they went after was justification for sex selection to create balanced families. And I was interested to note that during the conversation about that, which was quite limited, no data on how many boys are sex selected in this way. We know across the globe that India has a massive problem with this, and China and other countries as well, where sex selection has been allowed. What I found shocking was that most of the participants on this course through the debate were all for it, that it was presented in such a way as I felt that they were testing public opinion, see just how far they could go. So if any of you have time to go on this course, I would recommend it. It is, as I said, with FutureLearn under the heading of Politics and Society. These courses are free, and we've already had issues with one at Object about transgenderism, and we're still waiting actually for a response after nearly 3 months of asking them pertinent questions about the way in which that course was handled. So let's move on. I want to talk about the mother right. It kind of chimes in with what has already been spoken about. in terms of the way in which women are absent almost from this process, in terms of the literature, in terms of the contracting and the agencies. They're described as angelic people, they're altruistic, they want to provide this loving family with a child, and they feel bad that that loving family doesn't have a child. But after that, there's very little in relation to the woman. And the proposed changes to the surrogacy laws are trying to reduce the mother right. They are trying actually to even reduce the word surrogate mother to surrogate, which is also what they're trying to do in international law that they've been desperately trying to sort out since 2015, and they haven't reached any decision on that yet because it's far too complicated to actually legislate or regulate surrogacy, as other speakers today have talked about. Birth certificates will be expected to be delivered at the moment of birth, and the child will be removed at the moment of birth, and they want to make sure that parental orders are given within a 5-week window, which is different from the situation now where it can take anything up to 6 months for that to happen, which gives the woman a time for recollection and also to change her mind. The contracts that are supposedly going to be written are also asked to give up the child immediately. Now, I'm old enough to know that in the 1960s, it was still shameful to be unmarried and pregnant. That was before the Abortion Act, and many young women of mine at that time had babies and were giving those babies up. And they and those babies who were grown up have spent a lifetime grieving and trying to find each other. And yet here we are deliberately setting up such a dreadful kind of situation where babies can be taken away immediately and not given any opportunity for the mother to change her mind. In fact, she's no longer a mother, she's just a surrogate. I find that very hard to deal with because I know many of my friends, they gave up babies and they also spent a lifetime looking for those children. Some of them were fortunate to find their adopted children and some of them weren't. And we all know the story of Philomena, whose child was sent across the Atlantic to an American family. And that was a real story. And you would have thought that people would have watched that personal story and understood the grief that women feel. And how is it that you can have a child that has been within you for up to 9 months and that can be given up and there's no emotional content there? I find that very difficult. That's really all I have to say because I know time is short, but I would ask you to consider that one of the fundamental problems with all of this is the movement towards excluding the mother right. Mother right in the UK, for example, has only been an issue, a thing for women since the late 1920s. Up until that time, all children were the property of their fathers, irrespective of class. And it wasn't until after women gained the vote that they also gained the right to have some rights over their own children. So these are relatively short spaces of time in history. And here we are removing that right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Layla. Very interesting. We've still got a few questions pending. I'm going to leave the questions to the end because we want to squeeze in Olivia. Olivia Palmer is an eco-feminist. She was kicked out of the Green Party for calling Monroe Bergdorf a man, having stood twice in elections for them. She has a master's degree in human rights and international relations, and she helped with Nordic Model Now's consultation responses. Olivia has been targeted with ads for egg donation, and she's going to tell us about that. If you'd like to unmute yourself, please, Olivia.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Jan. So I think egg donation, I would say, is the least spoken about of all the aspects of surrogacy. First, obviously, it's important to point out that currently, because of this, we don't have commercial surrogacy in the UK, egg donors must be altruistic, which means they can't gain financially from donating eggs, they can be awarded up to £750 compensation. And you might think that's a lot, but in some countries such as the US, where commercial surrogacy is legal, you'd be looking at receiving around $10,000 for one round of egg donation. And there's no cap. So if you're conventionally attractive, a student at top university, no history of genetic conditions, you could be compensated maybe $100,000 for your eggs. There's no legal maximum, so you can really imagine the incentive there. I wanted to read you a quote from a man called Anthony Wood, who has a child that was born through surrogacy. This guy's a successful, wealthy lawyer, and he and his partner have been featured in a couple of documentaries. He says, selecting a surrogate or egg donor is not easy. The two processes are quite distinct, and the traditional surrogacy, where the surrogate is also the egg donor, is extremely rare. So these are two women involved now in this and being exploited. We were informed by the agency that they require surrogates to be at least 25 years old and to have already given birth to their own children before being considered for the process. For the egg donor, on the other hand, fertility and youth entwined. College students are the preferred source, which is a bit dehumanizing already. And if you want an Ivy League student, be prepared to pay a premium. We have interviewed 3 potential egg donors before we eventually chose Monica. Selecting a donor sounds easy until you are burdened with a portfolio full of height and weight statistics, genetic and family medical history, SAT scores, and psychological profiling. Looking back, I can't believe we spent time fretting over whether a balding maternal or paternal grandfather was important. So I don't know how you feel on hearing that, but to me, what stands out is the total commodification of human. You know, what do you do if you want a kitchen appliance? You go online, look at the reviews and look at the specifications. And now this is a man, essentially what he's doing is looking at the specifications of egg donors. But of course, egg donors aren't kitchen appliances, they're human beings. It seems to be completely ignored. Another really important point here is the sheer quantity of information being gathered and stored on potential egg donors. I don't even know all this information about myself, family history of male balding patterns, for example. The potential risk of a data leak is quite horrific to think about. Would you want your employers to be able to access all of this psychological profiling and medical history? What about criminals? It can't even really be anonymized because clearly looks are a huge part of this. So the photographs need to be linked to the rest of the information. And this guy has met 4 women in total. He's had access to all this information about them and then met them in person. Scary stuff. So what happens to the egg donor? Well, you go first through a round of IVF, which is to increase the amount of harvestable eggs. Usually, obviously, you just release 1 egg per month. And this is about maximizing potential yield. Again, we're not talking about increasing the output in a factory. We're talking about harvesting eggs from a human being here. And then they extract the eggs, which can be quite painful and invasive. What are the potential health risks? Well, it's a new technology, so we don't know the long-term effects of such things. We don't really have enough evidence of what happens when the donors reach the menopausal age. The whole process has increased exponentially without the long-term studies. But what we do know is that due to the IVF treatment that the women undergo, there is a risk. Some women develop a condition called Ovarian Hyperstimulation Syndrome, OHSS. Serious cases of the syndrome involve development of cysts, enlargement of ovaries, massive fluid buildup. It can lead to thrombosis, and in extreme cases can be, really harmful. While this does not happen in most cases, it is a risk and it should be considered. So a few years ago, Facebook introduced targeted advertising. I'm sure you might have noticed. And I personally was inundated with adverts pertaining to egg donation. And just to give you some context, I've never wanted children. It's not something that appealed to me. despite living in a heavily gendered society, I didn't have interest in playing with dolls. I never dreamt of motherhood. I was constantly told, you'll change your mind, which I accepted was a possibility. But what's interesting is that the women who say they want children are not constantly told that they might change their minds. And often this, you'll change your mind, was followed with, when you meet the right man. So you can see how compulsory motherhood, as I call it, is totally linked with compulsory heterosexuality. My male and female friends also sort of seem to give me different viewpoints on why I must want children. Women often pity me and tell me I'm just never experienced the wonderful love of having a child. And then men who are being entirely honest, I think, advise me that I should have children as some sort of insurance policy in case I need an organ donor or as an unpaid carer. Who's going to look after you when you're old? And I just think that's like really selfish reasons, to be honest, for having children. So in the context of all this going on, I log onto social media and I'm bombarded with adverts for egg donation. And the subtext here is, if you insist on not having your own kids, don't let those eggs go to waste. And it's just as if the woman's body does not belong to herself, but more, my body is society's property. Luckily, by this time, I was already an environmentalist and a feminist. My decision to not have children was really solidified by my knowledge of human rights and the environment. There are 7 billion people in the world, and I'm not going to help bring another one in. And if I do mysteriously change my mind, as everyone keeps suggesting I will, I'll adopt. There are 2,000 kids waiting to be adopted in this country alone. And I know Jan said earlier that she was calling me young. Well, I'm in my early 30s, but actually they really want women younger than me. And if I'd been targeted as a 20-year-old student, I just wouldn't have been informed about it. And if I'd been targeted under commercial surrogacy as a student and struggling to pay my bills, I could have been offered tens of thousands of pounds. And I just don't really know that it would have been possible for me to say no.
I think that's a great way to end, Olivia. You don't know that it would be possible, it would have been possible for you to say no. And I think very many young women find themselves in that position. There's a very good BBC series called The Nest, which is where there is a young woman in exactly that position. This is going to be her route out of poverty. It all goes rather wrong. And it's a very interesting, balanced portrayal of surrogacy, where at the end, nothing is quite what they seem. And the people you think are the nice people aren't necessarily. So I would recommend that. I think it's still available on Catch Up. Let's just check the questions, because we're now at the end of our presentation. I think Ellie's question, how can we stop commercial surrogacy coming to the UK, is that we have to join in, campaign, get on our mailing list, and we will tell you things that you can do. Layla mentioned FutureLearn. We've had Dr. Anna Cleaves, who's a member of Object, did a course with FutureLearn and found that there were no less than 12 substantial errors in how transgenderism was portrayed. So we have put in a complaint, which FutureLearn have so far ignored. So we complained to the Vice Chancellor of the Open University, who provided the course, and they have asked FutureLearn to respond to us. So they're obviously a little bit worried as to what they can say to us. But we are obviously pursuing that, and we think Dr. Cleaves is going to ask for her money back, so it will go to court. So there's lots of things you can get involved in. There's quite a lot of very dodgy courses out there that we would like to critique, because they're giving people a totally wrong portrayal of these issues. Now, we've got a question from, there's one for Gary, I think. It says, do you get much, from Tanya Ziegler, do you get much hostility from the Stonewall Alphabet gang on your position? And how do you remain so resilient? It's refreshing to hear a gay man centering the concerns of women and children, which I know a lot of people have echoed in the chat. So Gary, would you like to answer that?
I do get a lot of hostility, in fact, from the aggressive alphabetists, and there are about 4 hit pieces on me in the media, sometimes produced in the UK. There's one from Pink News, which a number of people, it's not actually a newspaper of any description. It's meant to be a paper for the LGBT community, but it's actually a ridiculous comic And there was a hit piece on me recently, and there have been a couple of hit pieces in the States. And what I notice is that when they're writing these hit pieces, the writers are very careful to exclude salient information. So I've seen pieces or references to me where I'm presented as this campaigner who's trying to stop gay men having families, or a campaigner who criticized Lady Hale for an award she upheld to a disabled woman so she could have children via surrogacy. So the important details are actually left out, including the detail that I'm gay. I mean, that's quite an important detail when I'm being presented as this terrible homophobe. And what one learns to do is to develop a carapace. I mean, it's still very annoying when this happens, but I think my view is, I think I really, the skills I learned in being as resilient as I am, and I'm not totally resilient, but those skills were learned when I was in my teens, when I was coming to terms with being gay, coming out at the age of 18 as a gay man, being out at university when there were very few other out people, and by going against the grain, standing up to the crowd, you learn how to assert yourself and to assert your identity, your right to be who you are, to have the opinions that you hold. And a lot of the older gay and lesbian rights activists like myself have learned these skills because we came to terms with being gay and lesbian and to asserting our rights in a culture that was much more homophobic than today's culture in Western society. And so we have those skills, and we've developed a rather solid sense of self. A lot of the younger people in the LGBT community are much less resilient, much more hypersensitive, much less willing to go against the grain, be disapproved of by their peers. And that's why I think that we're seeing this movement against some of the excesses of the LGBT movement being pioneered by older lesbian and gay activists.
Great.
I'll just add to that, sorry, Jan.
Okay.
I just wanted to echo what Gary said, and I've actually been featured in the wonderful Pink News. And again, they didn't mention that I was a lesbian, which, yes, I think it probably is quite relevant for the supposedly LGB, representing the LGB as well as the T.
Yeah. I think we're pretty much at the end. Dawn's got a question. This is our last question. Dawn says, how can you tackle the arguments of altruistic surrogacy for family members? Obviously, it's a special case. Can we back this one to you, Jennifer? Or would anybody like to take this one?
Yeah, I'll answer it.
Please,
yeah,
please do.
Because yeah, that is a common argument. Why can't a sister have a baby for her sister or something? And I would just say the same things I said earlier, that the health risks don't go away because the woman is not being paid. So she's still putting herself at harm. This most recent surrogate death a few months ago of Michelle Reeves, she wasn't having a baby for her sister. She was doing it for a purchasing intended parent couple. Now, can you imagine if your sister died having a baby for you, how awful and terrible you might feel? And the whole issue of bonding, just because you're going to hand a baby over to your sister doesn't mean you're not going to bond, and that baby's not going to bond with you. And the genealogical bewilderment that Gary mentioned, this child is being raised in this family that now the birth mother is being told she's the aunt. And yeah, I edited a book with Renata Klein and Melinda Tankard-Rice through Spinifex Press called Broken Bonds, Surrogate Mothers Speak Out. And there's actual accounts of altruistic surrogates in that book that were either surrogates for strangers or surrogates for family members altruistically, and the regret and the pain that they suffer is real.
We've got one very last question from Morva Magari. Says, what about the use of mechanical wombs, which seem to be imminently possible to produce babies? And if Jennifer would like to respond on that one, or give you away if somebody else wants to.
We actually have a couple of articles on our website that we've written about on, artificial wombs and the whole movement in that direction, which we see is hugely problematic. Again, they sort of commercialization and the farm factory producing of human beings. So I hope that we don't move in that direction. And we've also written quite a bit about uterine transplants. So if anybody wants to know more about that whole movement in technology, there's articles there that I would refer people to.
Great, thank you very much. Right, we have to stop, unfortunately, but thank you so much for all your information and questions and so on. And thank you so much to all our speakers for giving us such a rounded picture of surrogacy. Could we ask you please to take a moment to fill in our survey at the end of the webinar? Please also send a letter to your MP and put your address in there so that they know that you are a constituent. Next week, we've got a webinar again on Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock on prostitution. Very close links between prostitution and surrogacy, the use of women's bodies as a resource. We're going to have 3 survivors of prostitution who were pimped out in the old slave centres of Bristol, Bradford and Amsterdam. And they will discuss how they got into it, what went wrong for them, how did they get pulled into it, what can we do now to keep girls out of it, what do we need to watch out for, what skills do parents need, do teachers need, do social workers need to spot girls who are at risk and prevent. So please join us for that one. Again, many thanks to all our speakers, many thanks to you all for attending, and we will hope to see you next Sunday. We've got to stop early now because the Women's Human Rights Commission actually wants to use their own Zoom at the end of this meeting. Thank you all very much for joining us.
Did we do well, my darling girls? Did we really do well? We grew you up to be straight and strong, to do your best to know right from wrong. But we grew you in this awful world, a world that's hard and tough for girls, and part of your strength was to take it and make it okay. But it's not okay.